I was catching up with an acquaintance last week, and she was telling me about a friendship that had just imploded. She seemed almost energized by it, pulling out her phone to show me the final text message she'd sent. It was this long, formal paragraph about setting hard boundaries, protecting her energy, and refusing to hold space for the other person's toxicity.
Wow.
Naturally, I asked what this friend had done to deserve this kind of formal excommunication. I was expecting a story of betrayal or some huge blow-up. She just shrugged, almost annoyed I'd asked. He was just being negative, she said. I mentioned I was thinking about moving to a new city, and he started asking all these practical questions, like what about the cost of living, and do you have a job lined up?
Oh, so basic reality check.
Exactly. She took a sip of her coffee and said, I don't need that kind of critical energy in my life. It felt unsafe. I just nodded, but I was stuck on that. A friend asking practical questions, basic, normal conversational friction, was now being labeled as toxic and unsafe.
And the relationship is just over.
Over. A simple discussion was grounds for a relational severance, all wrapped in the language of therapy. It made me realize that the words we're using to protect ourselves, words like toxic, boundary, and safe, might be the very things preventing us from having any real relationships at all. And that story really, it really drives the mission of our deep dive today. We're looking at this profound societal shift where that exact kind of friction, the normal discomfort of life, is being redefined.
As toxic or unsafe.
Right. And we really need to dig into the consequences of that because it's affecting everything, our personal lives, our jobs, our whole society.
It's fascinating because what you're describing is the rise of what researchers call emotional fragility and hypersensitivity. These aren't just buzzwords. They describe this growing inability to tolerate discomfort.
Or criticism or any kind of conflict.
Yes, without immediately getting defensive or just pulling away. And the absolute core of it, the real danger, is confusing genuine discomfort with actual danger.
Like your acquaintance did.
Precisely. If we break that down, emotional fragility is basically having a very low threshold for any kind of emotional distress. The second you feel uncomfortable, you either get defensive or you blame someone else.
So it's never about looking inward.
Never. The fault is always external. And hypersensitivity is its close cousin. It's interpreting completely neutral interactions, like your friend asking about cost of living, as a personal attack. Or an emotional threat. You just assume malice where there probably was none.
That connects directly to my story. She didn't just feel uncomfortable, she said she felt unsafe. And that's where the language is so telling, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The word toxic has just become this giant catch-all label for anything that causes the slightest bit of friction.
A disagreement, a challenge.
Honest feedback. It's used as this shield, to avoid any kind of accountability. And it's all done under the guise of self-care or protecting my peace.
And that avoidance mechanism is really the engine of the whole problem. It trains you to evade things rather than engage with them.
Which just makes you more fragile, not more resilient.
Exactly. And this is the absolute cornerstone of a concept Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt call safetyism.
I've heard that term.
Yeah.
How would you define safetyism in this context?
So safetyism is basically a belief system where safety, specifically emotional safety, becomes the sacred value. It's elevated above everything else.
Above truth. Above growth.
Above intellectual rigor, above constructive criticism, above accountability. And when safety is the top priority, it just naturally interferes with development because it demands that we avoid all the necessary trade-offs of living and learning.
So if my boss gives me feedback and I prioritize my feeling of safety over the need to hear the facts about my performance, that's safetyism in action.
That's it in a nutshell. And they argue it's propped up by what they call the 3 Great Untruths. 3 ideas that run completely counter to, basic psychology for mature adults.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first untruth is, what doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
Wow. That's a complete inversion of the old saying. What does that look like in practice, believing that?
It means you start treating any exposure to difficult ideas or normal conflict as if it were trauma.
So a challenging book in a classroom isn't a learning opportunity.
It's a threat. Instead of seeing a stressor as something that can make you stronger, what some call anti-fragility, you see it as something that must be avoided or that some third party, like an authority figure, needs to solve for you.
Which explains why people immediately run to HR or a dean. Okay, what's the second untruth?
The second is, always trust your feelings. This is basically emotional reasoning. The belief that if I feel a certain way, my feeling must be a true and accurate reflection of reality.
But feelings aren't facts. I might feel threatened when my manager asks about a deadline, but that doesn't actually mean I am threatened.
Exactly right. But this untruth gives feelings the status of empirical proof. It makes it almost impossible to self-correct or to even question your own reaction. You get locked into a kind of victimhood based on your immediate emotional response.
And the third untruth.
The third one is, life is a battle between good people and evil people.
Ah, black and white thinking.
Completely. It encourages you to immediately moralize everything and sort people into heroes and villains.
Right.
There's no room for nuance or good intentions that went wrong or just complex human failure.
Which means if I feel uncomfortable, the other person isn't just someone I disagree with.
They're toxic.
They're a bad person, and I have a moral justification to cut them out of my life to protect my peace.
That's right. Those three untruths, together, they create a full operating system for prioritizing comfort over reality.
Okay, so let's unpack this. I want to look at how this fragility is eroding some of our key institutions,
Yes.
starting with the workplace. People are talking about a feedback crisis.
A very real crisis.
I mean, if we can't handle disagreement with friends, how on earth do you run a business?
You can't. Not effectively.
I saw this detailed story from a manager in a tech company. Let's call him David. He had this junior employee, Alex, who was brilliant technically, but was always missing deadlines.
A common management problem.
A totally standard issue. So David sets up a private one-on-one. He even uses the classic compliment sandwich.
Of course.
He praises Alex's creativity and then says, "We've missed the last 2 sprint deadlines. We need to talk about workflow and how I can support you." He thought it was constructive.
Sounds supportive to me.
Hours later, Alex filed a formal complaint with HR.
Wow.
The complaint said the meeting was incredibly hostile and that David's focus on deadlines created an unsafe and toxic work environment. David was floored. HR launches an investigation. Productivity grinds to a halt.
And what happened to Alex and David?
Alex was moved to another team to protect them, and David was forced to attend sensitivity training. He later said, "I'm now terrified of giving any feedback. If we missed a deadline, it's toxic. How do we run a business?"
And that story just perfectly illustrates the tightrope we're walking with this idea of psychological safety at work. There's some great research on this from Wharton.
What does it say?
Well, it shows that while a moderate amount of psychological safety, feeling you can speak up without being humiliated, is good for business,
Right.
pushing it to the absolute maximum can actually hurt performance in a lot of typical jobs.
Her performance. That feels counterintuitive. I thought more safety was always better.
It's a crucial distinction. In highly creative, innovative roles, max safety is great. But for most jobs, like following nursing protocols or financial regulations, maximizing safety can be a disaster.
How so?
Because when safety is so high that there are perceived to be no consequences for poor performance, accountability just evaporates. Managers become paralyzed, like David, and the whole system starts to break down.
That makes the feedback crisis feel very real. Managers are trapped. Okay, let's pivot from the workplace to another institution where critical discussion is supposed to be paramount. Higher education.
Another key battleground for these ideas?
A colleague told me about her cousin, a sociology professor, 20 years of teaching. She assigned a reading for her social movements course from a controversial 1970s feminist writer. And the whole point was to critique it, to deconstruct its flaws and compare its logic to modern theory. She wanted the students to wrestle with a difficult, imperfect idea.
Sounds like a great lesson in critical thinking.
Before the class even started, a student coalition saw the syllabus, organized a protest, and demanded the text be removed.
On what grounds? That it was academically unsound?
No. They argued its inclusion was platforming hate and made the campus an unsafe space. They claimed that just being exposed to the idea, even to critique it, was an act of intellectual violence.
Intellectual violence.
The administration got nervous and pressured her to pull it. She eventually did. She replaced it with a summary that just critiqued the original. The actual friction, that moment of confrontation with the source material, was just removed.
That is the erosion of academic discourse in real time. Pedagogy is being dictated by the demand for emotional safety, and it's replacing rigor with avoidance. And this connects to a broader critique of the whole resilience narrative in education.
The push to make students more resilient. That sounds like a good thing on the surface.
It can be, but the way it's often framed is the problem. The focus on resilience becomes deeply individualistic.
What do you mean?
Instead of us talking about the huge structural barriers students face, crushing debt, precarious employment, the conversation shifts. It suggests that the students' lack of resilience is the real barrier to their success.
So the message becomes, the system is broken, But instead of fixing it, you just need to get tougher to survive it.
Exactly. It puts the burden of a systemic failure onto the individual. It suggests you're personally flawed if you can't handle the stress. And ironically, by constantly telling students to be tougher, it just reinforces the stereotype that they're all snowflakes.
It's a depressing cycle. And it makes you wonder, if we can't handle friction in our friendships, our jobs, or our classrooms, what hope is there for public life? For democracy? Friction is the entire point.
It's the mechanism of progress.
So let's look at public debate. Think of a city council meeting anywhere in the world. The topic is a new climate policy, maybe a low-traffic neighborhood. It's complex, right? It could help with emissions, but really hurt local businesses.
A classic policy trade-off.
The debate should be about data, compromise, logistics. But that's not what happens. The moment a shop owner voices a concern about deliveries, an activist yells, "You're a science denier!"
Instant labeling.
A homeowner worries about their commute and they're called selfish. Then the shop owner's husband stands up and calls the activists authoritarian extremists. It just descends into shouting.
Because disagreement is being perceived as danger. Discomfort is being equated with moral corruption.
And this feeds directly into political polarization. There's some incredible cognitive science on this now. A study from Brown University found a direct link between extreme political views and an underlying intolerance of uncertainty.
An intolerance of uncertainty. That is so interesting. What does that mean in the brain?
It means people who can't handle ambiguity in their daily lives also show more polarized brain responses when they see inflammatory political content. They crave certainty, even if it's a false, oversimplified certainty.
So ambiguity itself feels like a threat.
Exactly. If you're uncomfortable with the nuance of a policy, that it can be both good for the environment and bad for a local business, you just simplify it. You pick a side, you find the extreme answer, and you label anyone who points out the complexity as the enemy.
It pushes everyone away from that messy middle ground where compromise and democracy actually happen. And this links directly to a huge shift in our conflict styles. Sociologists Campbell and Manning talk about how victimhood culture is replacing the old dignity culture.
How does that play out in these debates?
Well, dignity culture valued restraint. You'd absorb minor insults and only deal with major problems directly and privately. Victimhood culture, on the other hand, gives the highest moral status to the offended victim.
So grievance becomes a kind of currency.
A performance. It's about elevating your own moral status by appealing to the public, usually on social media.
Which creates an incentive for competitive victimhood. Everyone is searching for slights, for microaggressions, to prove they're the most wronged.
Precisely. And that style of conflict relies entirely on that third great untruth we talked about. Life is a battle between good and evil. You have to be the pure victim, and they have to be the villain.
And once your opponent is evil, you don't have to listen to them. You don't have to debate them. You just have to silence them.
Disagreement becomes an act of moral deviance.
So if we pull all these threads together, from the friend breakup to the city council meeting, it seems the constant use of this therapeutic language to demand emotional comfort is having huge costs.
Personal and collective.
You see more isolation because people just ghost and block rather than deal with normal friction. It creates this self-generated anxiety because you avoid conversations and then fill in the silence with your own worst fears.
You interpret discomfort as a sign of imminent danger.
And ultimately, it just breaks down the institutions, workplaces, universities, governments, that absolutely require hard conversations to function.
The final conclusion really is inescapable. Emotional maturity requires engagement, not evasion. Growth happens when we lean into friction and hard conversations. When we consistently mislabel normal emotional discomfort as harm, and when we choose avoidance over engagement as a primary strategy, we systematically undermine our personal and collective capacity for resilience, critical thinking, and social accountability.